Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. But before I do that, here's a quote that I picked just for this episode. To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Friedrich Nietzsche. My good friend Brian Bogert is on today. So at 7 years old, putting his hand up to a car door is run over with tires across his stomach, and apparently a guardian angel coming out, figuring out how to solve that problem, attach that arm back to the body, spends the next 2 decades raising money to help kids all over, I'm assuming, America, and went from that to building businesses and creating tremendous success in the insurance industry to today advising and mentoring business owners on some topics that I don't think are covered quite often, in my estimation, in the personal development industry. And the number one topic would be personal development, ironically. Last thing I'll say about this gentleman is, of all the people that I've connected with over the time on social platforms, Brian, thank you for coming on. You're the only person that has sent me, and created that connection, right? And I know connecting and converting is part of your ethos, but actually videos, like personal videos through the social platforms. So thank you for bringing that personal touch to everything that you do. And thank you for coming on today to share your wisdom with our audience.
Well, Jay, thanks for that awesome intro. Thanks for initiating contact. I always appreciate when people reach out and they're a real person on the other side. And I don't mean that as a bash on AI. I just mean it like there's even people who reach out with intents that are not always aligned. And, it wasn't very long in trading a couple of messages with you that it was pretty obvious the depth that you carry and the impact you're seeking to make. So, dude, it's my pleasure to be here with you today.
What have you learned in 2023 as it relates to working with businesses? What's the vibe on the street? What are the concerns? What are the pressures? What's in the air? Because you're somebody I can ask this question and get an authentic response.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's been a really, really difficult financial year for a lot of entrepreneurs. Okay. Now, there's also plenty who are crushing it out there. So I want to be really clear when I say this. There is opportunity on both sides, but I do think on the tail end of COVID, there's been this reverb of trauma that people are still experiencing. There's lack of a connection that exists in so many ways in a world that we have more ability to connect than we ever have. There's more isolation and disconnection, even from people who've been out in front of people for years. And so what we're seeing is definitely individuals who have had impacts on revenue. Dude, we were one of them. We got hit hard. We burned a bunch of stuff down last year, about a year and a half ago, in January and February this year. We got absolutely nailed, which set us off to a little bit of a delay in our year, but we've recovered. And I've been doing this long enough to know that time is one of our greatest assets as an entrepreneur. It's just stay in business one more day to fight. But I think there's this overall belief that, we are in a little bit of a recession by definition. And I think there's a belief that it's going to be getting a hell of a lot harder in the next 6 to 12 months. And so I think there's this impending fear that's coming as this reverb from trauma and highlighting it at an even greater rate. And then I think the world as a whole is so separated, segmented, and fighting in so many ways that, the world is starving for authentic leadership. And I think there's so many people out there talking and very few with anything to actually say. And so it's just creating a lot of confusion right now.
How are you changing that paradigm in your mind?
So I think I'm changing that paradigm by really looking at, and to use some of our language, frankly, helping people transform their waste into wealth, right? Like at the end of the day, most people think they're stuck because they have the wrong strategy or tactics in their life. I have the wrong sales system. I have the wrong scripting. I have the wrong technology. I have the wrong whatever, right? Or, man, I don't have enough resources. If I ever get to $100,000, I'm going to be great, right? It's just all these continued layers of these filters and blocks of protection that we're putting in place. When in reality, those are never the reasons people are stuck, ever. Those are critically important for leveraging and scaling our lives and our businesses. Hands down. I teach systems and processes. It's critical to running a business. It's never what keeps you stuck. Always, inevitably, what keeps people stuck is the trash from their past or their unresolved or unpacked waste that they've not been able to identify, remove, or transform into wealth generating activities that can connect and convert. So many people are still afraid to even lean into this concept of vulnerability and authenticity. They don't want to share their stories when their stories are actually what gives them credibility in doing what they're doing and being who they're being, right? And so there's this big lack of hesitancy to want to really, really connect because it requires us to drop our armor and to look inside and to sometimes feel like garbage for a minute while we're unpacking it. But the whole goal is to not live in that place of low frequency, low emotion energy for months and years, but minutes and moments, so that we can actually experience the life that's what's right in front of us instead of being caught in the past or fabricating a future that keeps us stuck.
How does someone share their story?
I think at the very beginning level, it's starting to pause long enough just to become aware of what your stories even are. And then second, how to become aware of what the lessons are that can be extracted from those stories so that they can become intentional in not only how they live in their life, but how they can then start to communicate their story for the purpose of helping someone else. You know, I tell my story and you briefed over it in the very beginning part, and I'm totally good with how you briefed over it. I don't feel the need to tell more depth unless people ask. But here's the reality. When people find out that I had my arm ripped off, I've had 24 surgeries. I almost lost it again when I was 20, went 10 months with it hanging by my side. And then they see these other things that have happened. The first thing almost all of them do is like, oh, well, my trauma is not that big of a deal. What? No, it has nothing to do with the comparison to other people. Regardless of the extremities of your stories, it's important, again, that you're aware of the lessons you can extract from yours and the ones you can be intentional with moving forward. And it doesn't matter if you got your arm ripped off or if at 8 years old, your dad gave you a look because you loaded the dishwasher incorrectly and you felt completely disconnected from yourself in that moment. Those are both relative traumas in the ways that our bodies experience them, but we're so quick to minimize the value of our actual stories that most people don't even know what they are.
Why do you think that the minimization occurs?
It's the conditioning, I think, that exists in this world. I think from the day that we are born, we are the brightest, most authentic burning light we're ever going to be. And then immediately parents, teachers, coaches, employers, extended family, right? From the time that we exist, start saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. You should be this, you shouldn't be that. You should want this, you should want that. You shouldn't want that. You should never be here. You should never look like this. You should never be with these kind of people. Should is a shame-based word. It implies that whoever you are, whatever you're doing, you're not good enough. But what do most of us hear? Oh, wow, I'm not being seen and understood for who I am. I'm not being connected with who I am. So our armor goes up because we believe we're protecting ourselves. Here's a little trick. The second you protect yourself, you're guaranteeing you're going to disconnect yourself. But when we go through that process, it's to fit inside this box of who the world has told us who to be rather than who we really are and who we want to become. I chased the what for a lot of years. I got it all, brother, but it cost me who I was. We're not asking the right questions, and the world tells us to literally reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain at all costs, right? 100 years ago, you could cut your leg, you could die. It makes sense that we have to react to those things, but in most of our first world countries today, we need to update our operating systems and realize that these areas that we think we still need to protect ourselves are actually hurting us more than they're helping us.
Are you arguing for the inverse of reduce and eliminate? We want more pain?
No, I want people to embrace the right types of pain so they can avoid suffering. That's one of our first concepts. Okay. So what does that mean? Pain is defined as short-term, intermittent, a direct cause from something and alleviated once that direct cause is removed. Then we as human beings put adjectives in front of it to screw up the meaning of it, just like we do with so many other things, like acute and chronic. Okay. Acute maintains the definition, but chronic inherently changes it because it implies that it persists after that direct cause is removed and it's no longer short term. So let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it really is, suffering, right? We don't want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. But the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance. So until we accept the current state of things, we cannot alter them. So what does this concept look like in reality? Well, we can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes every day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains from a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of being stuck in a loveless marriage or being wanting to get out in a divorce and not having a path to do so. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation we'll never get back. As a business person, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson who's contributing the most to top line growth to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth and losing all our other top talent because they were the greatest cancer in our culture. We as individuals, as entrepreneurs, and as leaders can embrace the pain of doing the difficult work to actually feel and heal the wounds of our past so that we no longer react and create damage in the moment to avoid the suffering of continuing that life of disconnection that just looks good on paper.
Would you say that part of the value that you bring to those that are prepared is to help them embrace those, like to break that paradox?
At the end of the day, I'm here to try to pattern interrupt as many things as possible, and that's one of the big ones, right? I want people to recognize that true strength actually hides behind vulnerability.
Well,
that when you're in a community,
if I'm learning from this, that would be a paradox. Like I have to break the cycle, I've got to lean into the cycle. So that's like a dog chasing its tail. So as part of the value is someone listening to this to have that person like yourself to begin that domino effect. How do we go? I'm just trying to.
So yes, at the end of the day, I would tell you that my purpose in life is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs. Okay. So what does that mean for me? It's a domino effect of what you say, where consistently I'm looking to raise levels of awareness at the highest degree possible within the masses and as well as individuals, right? To lean into personal ownership and responsibility so that we really can see ourselves for who we really are, right? It is all about, yes, doing just that, getting people to realize like the power is in our stories. It's about being vulnerable, right? We've got to lean into a little bit of pain before we can ensure that we're not going to suffer for the rest of our lives. Right? It's a matter of understanding that I've got to dig through my trash to identify and remove it, to also find the treasure that's buried beneath all that trash pressure. So yes, I'm not one of those that says reduce, eliminate, or avoid. I am one of those that's wanting to raise the awareness and get people to lean into the paradox that you outlined.
You said this on Dropping Bombs, quote, true strength hides behind vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Can you unpack that?
Yeah, I said just a second ago, I think true strength, I even said it on here just a minute ago, I think. Here's the reality. There's a whole lot to my story that will support this, okay? I was not vulnerable with even myself for a long period of my life, but I was unaware of it, okay? So what did I hear when I came out of the hospital? And I had a teddy bear in between my arm, and I'm sitting at 90 degrees, okay? Inevitably, people would come up to me and say, hey, Brian, what happened to you? Now, they were expecting the 7-year-old that I was to say, I was racing my brother down the street, we crashed our bikes, and I flew off the jungle gym, whatever, right? But I'd look at them deadpan in the eyes and say I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn off. Now, I got really used to seeing jaws hit the ground, and then as soon as they'd pick that up, they would pause, and they'd turn to my parents for validation. Okay? Now, what were they doing? Telling me that they didn't believe me, telling me that my truth was too audacious for them to accept from a 7-year-old. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel protected. I didn't feel seen and understood. I certainly didn't feel connected.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The other thing they started to do is view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation. Right? Immediately limiting me. Why am I going to show more vulnerability in that scenario when someone already at the surface can't see my own truth? So what did I do? I was told if I was mentally tough, if I was mentally strong, if I had a good mindset, that I would be able to crush it. And oh, by the way, that's only part of the equation. I'm sure we'll get to that somewhere in the discussion. But why do I tell you all this? Go ahead. You look like you have a question.
Oh, no. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Okay. So here's the reality. My mindset, my mental toughness was this. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. Now the world added a fifth part to that narrative, which was, oh, and if Brian needs help, he'll ask for it. Okay. Fast forward to 20. I'd crushed a lot of things. I don't even need to tell you the list of cool stuff I did, but what I now know is that I was really trying to prove it to myself more than I was trying to prove it to anybody else. But I go down, I re-break my arm in a snowboarding injury. It hangs by my side for 10 months. Okay, I got into a deep, dark, depressed, isolated place, and at that time in my life, I was surrounded by people, but I was completely alone. And nobody was there to help me. Okay, here's what I realized. I wasn't vulnerable. I wasn't authentic. I lived and preached the narrative, which is Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. So when I go down and no one is there, I was actually angry for a little while. I was a little resentful. I'm like, I've shown up for all these people. Why are they not showing up for me? And then I had to surrender to the reality that they just bought into my narrative. Now, I didn't have the vulnerability to actually ask for help in one of the most difficult times in my life. My parents didn't even know how badly I was struggling, brother. And I started to recognize that vulnerability and authenticity are part of the glue that bonds human connection. So that's what I started to lean into. But I'll tell you, fast forwarding this even a little bit more, I got really, really good at being just vulnerable enough, just authentic enough to get someone else to lower their armor so I could drive a Mack truck through and focus on them instead of on me. Okay? It was a master disguise from actually believing that I was being vulnerable and believing that I was connecting to legitimately still remaining at surface level for myself, but getting depth out of others. And it wasn't until I was 32 that I realized that when I shut off physical pain, I shut off emotional pain, mental pain, and spiritual pain for 20 to 25 years, and I didn't know it. I hadn't felt emotion in anything like I normally had. And the first time I felt it at 32, I realized that everything else paled in comparison, but human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. Vulnerability without emotion isn't really vulnerability. Authenticity without emotion isn't really authenticity. Yet that's the paradigm with which I was living my life on. Right? So that's where a whole nother level of depth came in.
Oh, so do you think that this is by and large the milieu of the development industry? It's almost like how do I say this? Because you mentioned the mindset. This is the visual that came to mind. Like, this is you.
Did you say, is this the mirage of the personal development? I was
like, I drew these two pictures. So this is the experience. The self is in between, and there's like a separation, persona, experience. And then that was where you were. And then with that second accident, you had this awareness. And like, this is where you're at now, integrating. And this is like how you're going to reach 1 billion people.
I would
hear mindset.
I would absolutely argue that in the personal development space, I think that that's one of the most toxic things that I'm witnessing, is the fact that literally that is still the narrative today, that if you just are mentally strong, if you're mentally tough, that you've got it all handled.
Isn't that based on self-perception?
Oh, dude, it's so flawed. And here's the reality. When you operate from mindset alone, you're literally cutting off all of the embodiment of everything below it, right? There's 40,000 cells in the heart called sensory neurites. They're brain-like cells. Okay, they carry cellular memory, and they've actually studied and shown that if you unpack the patterns of your past intellectually alone, you don't actually associate them, complete that 18-inch journey from your head to your heart and feel the associated feelings, that you don't actually heal and move from it. They've shown that without the head-heart connection, you do not move forward from the things that have kept you stuck in the past.
You know, it's interesting.
Like everybody says, mindset alone is going to get you there.
Well, but keep in mind, Brian, these are the same people that it's like the companies still produce capital. Right? Like, so integration of the individual is not necessarily a part of the process of developing shareholder value. I'm curious meaning part of what you're bringing to companies now is we can have the success, equitably and have integration of the people. Is that one of your main theses?
Yes, I believe that it's all about integration and alignment with people and organizations. And I do believe that it starts at the top, right? So to your point, cultures can still create capital, but I also see some of the greater fractures with even some of the largest brands and names out there come from a lack of congruence and a lack of integration and alignment at the top, right? That's also why the world is starving for authentic leadership right now. They don't know who to trust because we have all of these influencers out there positioning things, promoting things, talking about shit that they have no relevance in, right? And we don't know who to trust, who's legitimate, who's credible, who's real.
How do we, because I've been battling this for some time, it's nice to meet you. How do we actually, how do we combat the mindset dogma without negating the value of a victim standing on 2 feet? Meaning, like, if I'm a victim, I may need to tell myself I'm okay. Once I have power, how do I not become a bully? Like, how do we communicate this in a way where we're not just negating? That's like my insecurity. I was like, how do we help?
I think that's what I would tell you. I've been navigating since I got into the space, and here's what I would tell you. I don't ever say that mindset isn't important. It's that right now it's focused as the solution and it's only part of the equation. Okay. And so how do I highlight that? I show, and I even talk about, and we give examples to really be able to show that the highest of high performers are not those that are just mentally tough. They're those that understand their intellectual and emotional narratives, and they know how to balance and regulate between both, because both will lie to you and both will tell you the truth. I'm not one that says be emotional in business, but if you aren't in touch with your emotions in business, then you're operating from mindset alone, and it's an armor-based approach that's going to ultimately limit your ability to connect.
What have you seen that do to companies?
To operate just from mindset alone?
Yeah. What are some of the diminishing returns?
Yeah, so I've actually coached and consulted a number of I'm gonna focus on sales organizations for a moment, because I think that tends to be some of the more extreme. Okay. I think often what gets taken into approach in some of these cultures is we focus so much on the outcome, we focus so much on the profit, we focus so much on the growth, and we focus on mindset to be able to train and condition discipline within the folks that are working for us, in hopes that their discipline is going to align towards higher numbers, higher outcomes, higher outputs, right? But it's also a very, what have you done for me lately culture, right? So many people can work their asses off, have consistent months, and then they have 1 or 2 off months, and it's like it's all thrown out the window. Like their entire body of work is just gone and doesn't exist. There become these toxic sales cultures that ultimately it's like nobody feels like they're ever winning, no matter how good they are. I've worked with some of the highest sales performing groups, like almost like Olympic style teams, people who have multiple $1 million individual books of business that conglomerate into a larger one, with the deepest amount of toxic shame embedded in a culture, from a bullying at the top perspective, completely all the way down, so that the newest of new people who actually have the highest potential, the highest ability for growth, never actually make it off the ground because the pressure is too much.
And what are the long-term consequences in your view of that?
I believe that if you don't have consistency and persistency with relationships in whatever your business model is, it's really, really difficult to consistently fill a bucket that's got a hole in the bottom. Lots of sales organizations, lots of people who have high turnover, who don't have the ability to build those deep, trusted relationships, who don't know how to fulfill and create deep relational connections that rely on trust with clients, right? End up seeing higher turnover for new clients. New client acquisition costs, we know, are significantly higher than to maintain and keep a client. Yet most people's focus is on just growth rather than on what am I keeping and then how am I growing incrementally from there, right? I think that it really is always focused on what's in the future versus where are we now and how do we get ourselves on a path that allows us to have sustainability. That one of those examples that I told you about before, over the course of 5 years, they had over 50 new salespeople to their organization. Less than 5 made it. How much time, energy, resources are being spent training and developing people that the culture doesn't even support to be successful, right? It just ultimately takes away from the end goal of what people want, which is growth.
What's been the reception of your value proposition? Like, what?
I think that it's very open when we understand the basics of the human experience and what keeps us connecting versus not. And so when we talk about this concept of connecting and converting, we really are looking at the 5 pillars of waste to wealth, and also giving people framing and understanding on how to actually be the protector and connector for their prospective clients so that they can build trust, get them moving through the process faster, identifying and unpacking problems, doing things like upfront agreements, ways to actually flip the lid and repivot in a meeting that's not going well, right? It's all about humanity. And if we understand the human experience and the things that protect us or connect us, then we're in a position where we can start to use that in conversation to connect and convert in whatever we're selling.
Where do you see honesty playing into this on an interpersonal level?
It's all honesty and transparency, because if that doesn't exist, none of it works, right? Here's the reality. I'm the type of person as a business person, especially as one that coaches others, I am about as transparent as it gets. I just told you, right? I'm sitting here. I am a successful coach. We do run a successful business. We've impacted lots and lots of people. January and February this year were the 2 worst years I've ever had as an entrepreneur, or 2 worst months I've ever had as an entrepreneur. 6 months ago, I got kicked hard, right? We are running these different types of virtual events. I'm literally real time doing things around influence and persuasion with people, and I'm telling them that I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I'm not even trying to hide. Like, I'm not playing these NLP games. I'm not like doing this subtle
Wait, you
embed.
mean the neural liar program? Can finally someone I
but to my point, like, I can literally real time own, right? We ran a 3-day virtual summit last month, and there was 2 topics. Yeah. One of them was on reviews And we had never done them. I said, guys, I've researched this. We're implementing this. We're implementing it right now because I want you guys to be the first ones to give us a review. I've done the research. I've done the work. I know what's on the other side of it, but don't use me as the case study yet. Use me as the inspiration to get on the path, right?
What was the feedback?
It's so well received because people are like, nobody ever tells us what they don't have figured out or what they do have go wrong. And I'm like, but that's where all of our lessons are. I don't view failures anymore. I get lessons.
Would you say that people are smart enough, or at least the percentage, the coup percentage, to figure it out anyway? So if you had omitted it, it would have, undermined you anyway. And that, like, I'm curious.
I would argue that there's so much conditioned lack of trust from these types of approaches that I would tell you that as a large whole, they almost expect that I'm going to do it, and they're looking for me to do it. Right? I mean, dude, that's where the trolls on our ads right now. It's literally people that are like, oh, you're just like every other guru. And I was like, I never said I was a guru. I've never claimed to be a guru. And the first thing I do with all new people in our world, whether it's our webinars or 3-day events or our events, it's like, guys, I'm a human being just like you. I might be further along on certain paths than you are. I might have some wisdom, knowledge, and experience that you would like to learn from. But I'm not a unicorn in the sense that anything can be taught and anything can be learned. And I'm here to tell you, I was in your position 3 years ago or 10 years ago or a month ago, right? At the end of the day, if I'm not being real, honest, and transparent with who I am, what I actually know, the areas of which I'm not an expert, then who am I? I'm building a brand around vulnerability and authenticity, and that's literally how I show up in the world. And here's the truth. To be an educator, you only have to be one chapter ahead of your students. By the way, I even tell most of my students if I'm only one chapter ahead. I just told you what I did real time with the reviews in the middle of a live event when I was telling people why this is important in their business. How incongruent would I have been if I didn't disclose that? And then they go on, they're like, oh, Bogert doesn't have any freaking reviews here. It's like, oh, well, there you go.
Have you found that the business owners benefit from the relationship with you and your organization? Because how can they do both? How can they find the answers and essentially be the answer to their people on a daily basis? There's a tension between the two.
Yeah. And I think that that's also what a lot of entrepreneurs or solopreneurs or even high performing ones are also trying to escape, is exactly what you just talked about. It's like that dynamic of being the leader, having to have the solutions, create the solutions, have the vision, carry the weight. Yeah, it creates a place for us and for them to have a safe, connected community that we can have transference and transformation together. But what I would also encourage is that a lot of people who come through our world get so comfortable standing in their truth, they actually can diffuse a lot of that energy within their own organization by even being upfront and real with their own people, right? Like, how often does a leader come out to you and say, guys, we've got some really aggressive goals for this year because we got hit really hard? To be perfectly honest with you, I don't know the exact path, but we've got a handful of strategies that we want to deploy. And what I'm asking for is feedback, participation, and integration, because I can't do this alone, and you guys can't do it without me. This is a team effort. And at the end of the day, if I'm as real and transparent with you around my blocks, my deficiencies, and I'm open to you giving me feedback when I'm just in the way versus being additive, then I think we all run and move faster together, right? Like, creating just transparent messages about real state brings sales teams, brings leadership teams closer together when the leader has the ability to actually stand in their own truth. Because guess what? All of the senior leadership in an organization is already looking at the owner, already looking at the CEO. They already have a formed opinion on who they are, how they operate, what they do. And it's like Eminem from the 8 Mile, right? When he started off that last rap and he gave every single piece of ammunition the other guy had against him, he had nothing to fight against. It's almost the same way without exposing ourselves or even having to go to the deepest, darkest of levels. Because if we're real and we're congruent and we establish trust, then people just start to trust over
You think
time.
social platforms are forcing this? Like, if we don't embrace that cultural evolution, then, it's what's going to happen to us.
We're on a slippery slope right now, I think. And I don't say that from a scarcity or a scary perspective. I do see that the integration of AI right now is going to make it even more confusing, right? Because, with the evolution of chat GPT, which, by the way, I've never once used, And I don't say that to brag on either side of it. It's just the truth. I've been interested. I've considered going in and looking at it. I just haven't. I know lots of others who have. I've got lots of clients who use it. But what I can also tell you is we're hearing a lot more of the same out there. And all of a sudden, people went from not being able to write to putting out really long social posts. And it's like, it only further dilutes, like, what's the real voice? Who's the real person behind the message? You know, what's the credibility? What's the trustworthiness of this? And I do think that in the influencer space for so long, people have built brands by taking pictures in front of cars and homes and planes they don't own to try to impress a bunch of people that they don't even know and build platforms around, you can have this lifestyle too, but what are they selling? Right? It's all surface level bullshit. And so at the end of the day, yes, I think we're on this slippery divide. Now, to the credit of this next generation, and I'm going to say that folks under the age of 24 to 25, I am seeing a high degree of awakeness in that group because of, I believe, their existence around social media. I would tell you that their sniffers for bullshit are higher than almost any other age group I've seen.
Wow. Why do you think that is?
I think they're the only generation that's grown up with technology in their pocket for pretty much their entire life. I mean, think about it. Social media became prevalent in the early 2000s, right? Facebook started to blow up in 2004, 2005, right? If you look at a 20-year-old today, right, they're literally sitting here and they will have had 20 of their 20 collective years of life with device and social media in and around their existence. My kids are 8 and 9. They know what Instagram is. They talk about YouTube and YouTubers. My kids don't have access to these things without us, even at 8 and 9, but they know about it. It's like real time. It's relevant. And this concept of influencer, even for an 8 and a 9-year-old, we didn't teach it to them. They're seeing it and absorbing it because of where culture is. So why do these younger generations have a greater sniffer to it? I think they've had more exposure to it and they've seen it from the beginning in their entire life. A lot of the others of us are trying to integrate old brick and mortar style business approaches, right? Like voicemails, like integration of text messages. Like, though those have been around all my whole career, it's still like is continuing to evolve. I mean, I was using video messages 10 years ago, and that made me stand out in my risk management employee benefits consulting field. In an archaic industry, they were like, what, you're sending videos to prospects? Yeah. And we landed some really big deals. But I think that their ability to see through marketing, positioning, influence, to see truth in people is higher than any other age group that I've seen with people. And that doesn't mean that others aren't good at it, just to be clear. It's just, I think as a general consistency, the younger generation sees it.
Could this idea that the younger generation doesn't want to work be tied to the older generation not understanding how to work with them?
So I think that that's like a whole other issue, but yeah, I think that there's, to what you just said with the younger generation not wanting to be tied to work.
Like that's the adage, right? Or the sentiment that the youth, the younger generation, they hear that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's always been the conversation though, regardless of, generations. I mean, we've heard the millennial conversation for 25 years now, right? Like how millennials are lazy and incapable of doing anything, and right. But then we see very frequently like, oh, they hit a stride too, just like many others, right? I think that there is always going to be that divide between the youngers not wanting to do this and our perception of what hard work looks like as an older generation being layered onto the younger, right? Like the integration and uptake of technology creates opportunity at exponential levels for so many people, but there are people 20 years older than me that view it as threats to jobs, right? They don't see technology and the advancement of technology in creating efficiencies and really putting our investment in where the value is delivered, interacting directly with customers for many organizations or what have you. So I think a younger generation right now is probably trying to separate from some of the bullshit and damage that is so apparent and toxic in some of the older influencer ranks today. Right? I mean, there are narratives and messages that are being put out there that are just damaging our country, our world, our citizens. And I'm not even calling out a side, okay? Because it's not, again, I don't get into politics and polarization. That's not who I am. But we see it consistently, right? There's just this consistent pressure. And then, the younger kids are never going to make it. The younger kids aren't going to do this. The younger kids don't work hard enough. Dude, there's more 16 and 17-year-old millionaires now than there were 10 years ago because of the access to technology. There are people who are financially independent before they even graduate high school because they learned how to leverage the web early in their life. Like, yeah, there might be anomalies to some people's degree, but they're out there. It's possible. And really what we're seeing is opportunity being less limited now than at ever in any other point in history. People's access to be able to start a business, start creating revenue streams, building audiences. The world is so small right now because of how our technology brings us together, right? 20 years ago, if you grew up in a small town in Idaho, that was your only comparison point.
So I'm curious of your thoughts on this. In agreement with that, let's say all that's the case, then the level of awareness and therefore responsibility of those at the helm of organizations is going to have to be proportionally growing to that access of control of the lowest common denominator. And that brings us to your value proposition. The waste that's going to grow without evolving, you want to turn that into wealth. I mean, I'm trying to use the words, but
yeah, you're using them, bro. You're doing good.
Am I on?
Yes, I think that's exactly what it is. I'm trying to get more and more and more people to be able to live the lives that they want to live, to be able to know how to set appropriate and healthy boundaries, to be able to love themselves and advocate them for themselves, and to be able to actually implement things within their businesses that will have real impact, predictability, and consistency in the way that they can do business. Right? I think we have so many toxic narratives that are out there, and there's so many voices that are telling people, oh, well, I mean, geez, we've even heard these out in public recently. If you don't make $400,000, you're a piece of shit. It's like, what? Like, the top 1% is in like the $250,000 range. So you're saying that 99.9% of people are pieces of shit? Like there's just narratives that are being just flown around. And it's like the new standard today is to be a billionaire, when in reality, that never leads to a happy life.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So I'm going to follow your train of thought here. That would lead, if I'm the observer, a larger swath of the population to be feeling shame. And you're making an argument, and I want to hear that could lead to idealized pride, like false pride, which destroys the culture. Like at every
The other side of it as well is, I think, just the perpetuation of shame and blame is putting damage in a place to try to get people dependent on your programs, or to lean in using scarcity, when we know, right? Here's the reality. Fear and pleasure, like some pain and pleasure, are the two biggest reasons people lean into stuff. Why does everybody use pain, right? From the idea of creating scarcity, making people feel less than, making people feel like they're not capable, right? Like that's it. All it does is keep those people down, and it keeps that separation. Look, at the end of the day, I don't want anybody to idolize me. I don't want anybody to be like Brian Bogert. I want everyone to be the best version of who they are and make as much damn money and have as much damn impact on the world as they possibly can. My job is to help make sure that we pull out the resistance in their world, internally and within their business, so that they can go do that.
All right, I want your help me here. Should I start arguing with debating these people? And I'll say myself, because I don't want to throw you into this mess. Like, I'm for the allies versus the axis here, but I've thought about this for a long time. Now I feel like I'm safe enough to talk to somebody about it. So am I a coward for saying nothing? Because I think I'm, a coward in a lot of ways. Cowardly. Should I start saying something? Like to the.
Oh, Jay, I won't tell you what you should or shouldn't do, because remember, should's a shame-based word. But here's what I will tell you, okay? I would ask you to identify and describe how would going against these folks align with your brand, the impact you want to make, and who you want to impact.
Well, I mean,
will it perpetuate the brand, like your ability to impact more people? Will it allow you to separate yourself in a way? Now, I will tell you, for myself, with the exception of a handful of conversations like this where I'll make random references, you've also not heard me call out a single particular person. Okay? The one comment I made, people probably can associate who it came from, but the reality of it is like, I have made an active choice up to the point that I've actually had PR agencies decide they don't want to work with me because I was not willing to attack other people. Okay? So what do I do in the situation around this? I try to bring awareness to what are the patterns that are taking place. I try to raise questions for those who are observing and witnessing. I mean, do we see the lack of congruence that's existing in the influencer world right now? Why is it acceptable for us to tolerate when someone's preaching something and their actions do not align, right? We can call attention to the issue without ever directing it towards a person. And we can do it in a way that is accessible to people so that we're just getting them to consider for themselves. I'm not telling anybody what's right or wrong, by the way. I believe that the toxic shaming approach is damaging and it goes against who I am and what I believe. However, I'm not saying that these are bad people. I'm just asking us to really challenge what is the standard with which we are going to hold people to for investing in ourselves, and who are the real experts versus the perceived experts.
Thank you for your feedback, and I'm trying to avoid the either or, in the sense that can I face my enemy in ideas? Like, we have a differing of ideas. We're all representing ideas, and we also are people. Right?
Yeah.
So can I battle? How do I battle the ideas? And that's what kind of the contention is. If I'm going to go head to head with someone, idea versus idea, as opposed to not, because it's like the Popper's paradox of tolerance. The more the paradox of tolerance is, the more that we tolerate intolerance rises up, destroys us and itself. So I would argue that these ideas that we're elucidating on, they're intolerant ideas because they separate people. So much so, like, here we are. This interview went from that to, like, God, finally I have somebody to talk to this about. Like, I've so because I've been holding.
But I mean, at the end of the day, I never want to do anything that's decisive, or divisive.
Okay.
I don't want to separate people. I said decisive. I want to be decisive in everything. I don't want anything to be divisive.
Divisive.
I don't want to divide people. And so for me, I'm very intentional in how do I go about that. Now, you know this, and I'll reference it on here on this show as well. People know that I am friends with Brad Lee. Okay. We've built a relationship. I've been on his show twice. He came down and flew down to Phoenix to be on my show. If you watch any one of those 3 interviews, you will see the very clear difference of opinion on a variety of things. Yet we both have a level of respect for each other. And so at an individual level, I will go at an individual level, even on specific comments and beliefs for that individual, with them directly. I'm not going to create content to target and rip them down. I'm not going to talk shit about people behind their back, right? But to Brad Lee's point, one of the things I've said to Brad for a long time, I'm like, dude, your content is so polarizing. Like, and who I see him to be off camera, though it's not a different person, there is a different depth and warmth that I have personally experienced. So I've said to Brad, and I've said it on camera, and I've said it to his face, and I've said it on other podcasts. Like, if you could lean more and more into the off-camera Brad on camera, like, his brand would explode because he'd be accessible to everybody, whereas right now he's just accessible to a small population, right? But I've gone toe-to-toe with him on concepts of vulnerability and anger and, right, like, leadership styles. I've been in this,
Those are great episodes on dropping bombs. Anyone listen to this?
Thank you. The reason I was calling it out is I was giving him as an example because there have been more than one occasion that he and I have gone toe-to-toe on a concept, right? Like, I called him out on my podcast because he made some blatant comment that I'm not even going to repeat here. If somebody wants to hear it, go listen.
He loves you.
He said something that was just so audacious, and it was like, it was so not even congruent to the people and things that existed in his life. And I called him out on it, and he's like, oh, well, you just have this belief because of this belief of yours. And I was like, actually not. I'm testing congruence for you right now because you just made a blatant comment that could create damage to people that you care about. Like, why do you do that, right? Like, why do we tolerate this?
How do you take it?
He leaned into it, and he ultimately surrendered to it, and then backed off the point. He's like, no, you're right, I don't really mean it to that level, right? But the point is there's also certain personalities of people that don't ever get checked.
So right? That's, I guess, my curiosity is, can we, now I'm going to include you in this because I haven't been strong enough to do it myself. So can we check? Like, I'm visioning hockey, like we start pushing the what do I didn't play sports, but like, check, can I rely on Brian? Like, I'm going to start checking.
Here's the reality
in on it. Now there's 3 of us. It's the
I don't believe
Axis. I'm
See, I don't
rooting
believe
for
in
you.
difficult conversations or conflict really anymore. I believe in diffused conversations and choices followed by actions. I am in a place in my life where I feel like I can have any conversation about any topic, probably with any person.
Yeah.
And part of it is because of a concept that we teach, right? To be the protector and connector, it requires you to have a strong spine and a soft front. Strong spine means I know who I am, I know what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do, what my boundaries are, what my value is, my views and perspectives on things, the things I don't know, right? Blah blah blah. Just I know myself inside and out, which means I can be unwavering in who I am and my beliefs. That doesn't mean that I don't change my perspective on my beliefs ever. What that means is that I'm solid in who I am and how I'm going to approach it right now. But I'm also open-minded, right? Because I'm open to new ideas and I'm open to being shifted in things. But to have a soft front means I can't go in with a chest piece of armor expecting battle. I like to think of this as like if my wife and kids want to be consoled, they don't want to come lay their head down on a metal chest piece of armor. So if you're having a conversation with someone and you're going to check them, guess what? If you check them, point out aggressive, you're probably going to get aggression on aggression. Okay. Some people you need to elevate the tone, the cadence, the delivery to get their energy to comply. But at the same time, like sometimes the greatest ways to check someone is just to ask a really well calculated question that in and of itself points to the lack of congruence that exists in whatever statement or belief they just outlined. And if we can get them pause long enough to contemplate a question, to answer it with absolute reality, then we also get to see either for ourselves or for others what the truth is behind it. I just had this happen on a social post over the weekend. Okay. I had a social post over a weekend and someone, I'm not going to go into details. I'm not going to say who it is because, again, that's not the point. It's someone that I have a deep level of respect for. Okay. And this post came out and I got triggered. I got triggered because it was essentially about medicating our youth of today. Okay. I have two special needs kids, and both of my kids are currently on active medications. I say that out loud. Now, why do I say that as well? Because neither of my kids did it until they had consent and decided and discussed. We evaluated all the options alongside it. We're in a place of advocacy where they can tell us the effects, the benefits, the differences. We've had the neurofeedback, all of the integrations, all the therapies, all the everything for 4 or 5 years to put us in a position to understand now where there are certain areas that this might help it. And in our experience, getting on the right meds has actually given us more access to our real kids than the anxiety that was showing up on the outside. And oh, by the way, we're better at teaching people how to diffuse this stuff than most people. There are kids, but they have special needs that are neurologically different. So I was trying to challenge the intent of the post because another person commented on it. Okay. Now,
Exciting.
I posed a very neutral, diffused question and shift of perspective based on the string that I had seen. Whenever you do that, you're going to see one of two things. You're either going to allow that person to recognize that that's not what they meant, and then they either give clarification that shows that the lack of congruence wasn't real, or they double fucking down. Right? Either one is good because it's allowing us to get a temperature check for what's right in front of us. And do we want to proceed or push on this consistently now, or continue to build and establish trust with those relationships? I'm one of those that doesn't try to cut people out from their knees like the first time I meet them. But if they're an absolute asshole or a dick, they're going to get checked from me pretty fucking hard. And not in a soft front, strong spine kind of way. Right? Because I'm not going to be pushed around or bullied by anybody. Right? And I'm not going to allow others to be pushed around or bullied when I'm in witness of it either, because that I just don't stand for that shit. Right? So, diffuse neutral conversation, this guy doubled down. Doubled down.
Gonna tag me in.
Hard attacking a complete different perspective. Now, again, I don't say this to vilify the person. What did it tell me? It gave me absolute clarity that two things were going to happen. He wasn't open to a shift of perspective, even though his words weren't congruent and neither were hers. And then when we got clarification, they doubled down because now they're in a fight mode and they're trying to prove to me all the reasons why this makes sense. When, by the way, I never even went against what they told me. I just asked questions. That's all I did. Okay. And so I believe that we can have these conversations with anybody. The question becomes, do we have access to have the conversations with them? Or are we trying to find a way to create a conversation with them? Right? Because I do believe that there's a time and a place for everything. And I am a believer that there have been many, many, many influencers, big names of people that I think are leaning more on the toxic side that I have considered friends or do consider friends. But it's not like the first time I meet them, they start to actually soften because they don't know who to trust either. right? It's like this whole broken system of everybody's armored and protecting themselves, and they don't know who to lean into. And so it's like we just have to create enough spaces where people can feel safe and protected so that they start to lower their armor, and then we get to see the truth.
You think a part of it is you're their coach?
I like to look at it that way, but even in a non-formal sense, we can coach anybody if we can get them to think or feel differently, or if we can just get them to think or feel in the first place by asking a calculated question.
Are you familiar with Socrates at all?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not somebody that can quote things, but yes, very familiar. I've read tons of Socrates. Yes.
What they did to him?
Yeah.
So I guess, is that our fate in that scenario? You're drinking the poison. And then.
So I don't necessarily think we have to drink the poison to be able to get close enough to make that happen. That's something that I often debate for myself, though, right? Like, there are people that I associate with that are not congruent with my brand, with the messages that we preach publicly, but I believe I know who they are, right? And there are many who've said, well, you really need to put yourself into a position where you can disassociate from some of those relationships because it's going to tarnish your own brand. And I look at it through the lens of, like, again, I'm more about inclusivity. I'm more about connecting. I'm more about creating depth. I'm more about meeting people where they are. And I live my life so objectively and non-judgmentally that for me, when I say neutral and diffused, like, if I get triggered or I'm reacting to somebody, that's the first thing I pay attention to. Because if I'm getting triggered or reacting, I have to look inward in myself to discover what is it about the situation that I'm either seeing in myself, that I've felt in the past, that I've had these tied to some of my waste, that are putting me in a position to feel even defensive or triggered in this moment. Right? I had another situation like that happen this last weekend with a good buddy of mine who's a business partner of mine and I've done a gazillion projects with, right? I get this random email on Friday from their team member that really lacked a lot of context, didn't have a lot of clarity in it. And I responded back with just a quick, easy email to get clarity, of which I got even less. Okay. And so what did that lead to? Which is what I knew in the beginning. Hey, I'm going to jump on the call with this person anyway and get clarity. Now, that said, I got triggered because of the way that the situation took place. And I also knew that even if he was in a position to talk to me that day, I wasn't neutral and diffused because I was feeling defensive, because it felt like it was being implied that I did something that wasn't above board, and that's not who I am. So I had to calm that reaction because that's innate to some of the trash from my past, because I could have picked up the phone and tried to call him, but that wasn't the moment to do it. We talked to this morning and we resolved it all in less than 10 minutes, absolutely clear, completely connected, no elevation of energy. But had I reacted in that moment because I got defensive or locked up, right? This isn't even a conflict situation like we're talking about checking people, but this happens every day. So if someone like Brad gets me triggered and I feel like I want to engage in a conversation to challenge, I can't do that fighting. I can only do that through surrender, because fighting is only going to force a side, and it's not going to create an opening for him to actually see or hear or feel something different.
I want to, well, now we got to shout him out, because one of the most, I would say that's one of his most endearing qualities is how much he helps me just within proximity be aware of my own demons as we interact with amongst each other. One of the most thoughtful, clever rhetoricians, or rhetoric, quite the philosopher there. I want to mention something. When you were just outlining the brand, the tarnishment of the brand, so you've been advised to steer clear of certain, let's say if it's organizations or individuals, because there could be consequences to the brand or the belief consumers have in X is all for Y. And you're saying, well, despite that, I'm going to lean in because I really know them, right? You see their potential, you see what maybe hasn't. I want to just acknowledge you for that and say that's culture right there, because right, like that's culture. It's right. It's like what's underneath the brand. Like it just, can you unpack that a bit? Like what is it about what is it about how you want to be in this world and the message that you want to share that we that leads you to make that decision. Follow your conscience despite the short-term consequences.
Yeah. The reality of it is, and this is a statement I've never actually said in response to this question, but the statement I often talk about when we're unpacking the concept of what is trash and what is waste and how do we start to find it. I would tell you that the broader depth to why I approach things so objectively and non-judgmentally is the mere fact that the trash from your past is not your fault. It just becomes your responsibility once you become aware of it or you start burying others in yours, right? So what does that mean for me? Well, my wife and I, in doing our work and unpacking the things that almost caused us to get divorced, that almost caused us to sink a business, that almost caused a whole bunch of other things, right, has now led to a whole variety of other repair, generational breaking of patterns. But we were able to trace our triggers, our trash, back 3 generations. Okay, so what does that mean? We can look at both of our parents through a lens of empathy and compassion, given the environments they grew up in, the situations that took place, the stuff that was being patterned down. So why do I tell you all that? Because for me, I don't make judgment on people in finality until I've had multiple personal interactions with them. Okay, so why is that? Because look, I can look at some of the bigger names that are out there. I can look at some of those audacious comments that I referenced earlier, and I can feel like there's this element of toxicity. But if I meet that person, I'm not going in with an assumption that they are who they are. I'm going in to see who they are and how does that compare or contrast to the brand that I have experienced. Okay, because there's a lot of people who create brands, but they aren't the actual person that is the brand. They're portraying a brand. Okay, and so for me, what do? I look at and say, if the trash from people's past is not their fault, then sometimes the damage that even some of the most successful people are being in this world are creating, they're not even aware that they're doing it. I was angry for over a decade and creating damage in my house with my wife and my kids, and I didn't know it. She kept trying to bring it to my attention, but I wasn't in a place to receive it. I wasn't aware, right? And so here's the reality. If I'm not aware, I can't be intentional with it. I also can't be held accountable for it. But the second you become made responsible is the second you're made aware or you start realizing that you're burying others in yours. And so for me, how do I monitor this over time? Well, all I can do is speak to Brad based on my experiences with Brad. All I can do is speak to my other friends that are bigger names based on my own unique experience with them. So people will call me and be like, well, hey, like, what is the deal with Brad and this? And I said, my experience with Brad is that he actually has a heart for helping people.
Oh, yeah.
My experience with Brad is that he is showing up consistently, even with some of the polarizing content. And I've seen him serve some of the lowest level, lowest income individuals with absolute heart. I've seen Brad walk into a room of entrepreneurs with zero judgment, but I've also seen Brad walk into a room on stage with swag and his Ferrari key because he plays both sides. Okay, I don't say that to vilify Brad. My experience with Brad is I've seen Brad get vulnerable. I've seen him get real. I've seen him get open, but I also see a lot of Brad's patterns. Okay, so I'm using Brad as an example only because he's the only name I've referenced on this, but he's a perfect example in this case. Okay, now so far there have been a handful of situations with Brad that I was not sure, or I felt like things were not quite right, or something wasn't in alignment. Every time I've had a conversation with him, had an ability to communicate with him, actually brought this to address, we always find a way through it, and none of it's really a big issue. And he responds openly to be able to do things. So what does that tell me? I'm going to continue to lean in because what he doesn't know and the things that I see of him that I know I can help him with, it's only going to be a matter of time with our relationship before he starts to integrate different pieces, because I've seen this happen time and time again. However, I will stop being neutral and defending people based on what I know if they show me a repeated pattern of either burning or creating damage when there's either opportunity or when I've brought something to their attention. Do they step into it from a position of awareness and ownership, or do they just react? Okay, because if I have a pattern of reaction and even coming at it neutrally, then I'm not going to invest energy there any longer, because that's just a toxic drain. Okay, but most people, when they're met with empathy and compassion, when you're in a position where you're viewing them non-judgmentally and objectively, and I don't want anything from them, I want something for them, most people start to lean in and actually open up to the human side of things when that environment and those variables exist.
So I'm not judging their potential. However, I can criticize the behavior.
And you can hold them accountable to behavior.
And I do that through speech. And I do that through being aware of how I relate to that relating in the moment, in the interaction.
Yeah.
And you it's so, can you unpack that further?
Yeah. So
thanks, by the way. This is like a master.
Where do you want me to take it further? Because I'm happy to, but give me a little bit more clarity on where you want me to go with it.
Well, okay, so can you just add into that let me repeat myself so I can think through this. Yeah, you're non-judgmental of their potential, right? There's a level of benefit of the doubt in the interaction. However, there can be a critique of the behavior, so there's actually truth. There's honesty, there's an interplay, so that you don't develop a resentment or you don't repress your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. That creates your own self-awareness. It grows you. You're responsible in that interaction. So there's a relationship, there's a relating. And so my question is, can you unpack the four? I love this when I was preparing the four pieces of, see if I got it. Repression, maybe the words, not be able to articulate oneself. The four things that you talked about in other shows that lead people to actually negate themselves and let others down, is how I was perceiving it.
So there's a few different things that I do through the framing of four. So this is what I'm trying to get clarity on for you, for which exactly direction. So the human experience, I talk about safety, protection, seen, understood, and connection. Is that what you're wanting to talk about?
No, the unsaid, the inability to articulate oneself,
the suffering. Got it. Okay.
So because I'm thinking my enemy is
the four roots of suffering. It's the four roots of suffering. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm thinking my enemy is suffering. I mean, that's why I don't like them, frankly. They're just, you know.
And at the end of the day, that's also what I'm trying to help figure out, is what's the source of their suffering. Because if I can point light on it and alleviate it, then they no longer have to suffer.
Well, I just want to throw this in the pot. Existentially, you know, what the hell are we doing here? So, meaning there's a level of suffering, like, you know, what am I?
There is, but you know, that's what we're on a mission to do, is to try to minimize the level of suffering that exists on this planet. Okay. But to answer your question, because I think this is what this will bring clarity, and now I know what where you're wanting to go. I believe that almost all of us suffer for one of four reasons. Okay, the things that are left unsaid, the things we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or understand, or the things that are left undone. Okay, so even in the example that you talked about, it's like, well, we can, you know, not be judgmental of their potential, right? I would also add on that and say, I'm also not judgmental of their past. I'm trying to view them as neutrally, objectively, and non-judgmentally in the present as possible. Because I don't know what happened in the past, what they've done, or what repair or not they've made. And I also don't know what they're going to do in the future, but I can see them and meet them right now. I can, to your point, challenge behavior, but I would argue that you can't challenge behavior unless you have some level of awareness as to what their intent even is, right? Because if you can get enough clarity to know, like, I know Brad really, really, really wants to help people, right? So when I know that there's a certain portion of the population that's completely triggered and polarized from some of his content, that are people that I know that if they were in his presence, he would and could help, I'm like, bro, some of these things aren't congruent, okay, to where I know you want to be. Now, all that said, again, I'm just using Brad as an example because I love the guy and I do it in front of him.
It's the perfect example for this podcast.
But that's
the perfect example. It's the perfect, and I'll tell you after the show why it's the perfect.
But the point is like, when that starts to happen, right? When I have a little bit of a belief on who they are, and I've asked a little bit of questions to understand, like, you know, who they're trying to serve, what their approach is, what their intent is, right? Or if they say something really polarizing, asking a question in the moment just to see if I can see clarity, that's not even challenging the behavior. That's just causing them to slow down and think or feel. Okay. I believe, though, that in those four areas, many people suffer because they don't have clarity on certain things. They've never been given permission to lean into something. And so one of the quickest and easiest ways to get others to lower their armor is to tell a story that is highly relevant to whatever their situation is, or brings point to the lack of congruence that exists. Often I can tell a personal story because I've made a lot of mistakes and I've been in a lot of areas in life and I've done a lot of different things. And so I've got a repertoire of stories of my own that I can often just share in a situation like that. Here's the reality. Every time I tell my truth, I tell a story, I give some framing, I ask questions. Okay. Every time we're doing hot seat coaching in a room, what happens? Every time I say something out loud, it's giving people permission to feel and say things that they haven't otherwise. And it's giving them words to articulate their situation, their feeling, their perspective, sometimes in a way they've never even considered before. And by virtue of being able to have permission and have words to articulate and understand, now they can act and do and alleviate suffering. And so in so many of these situations, that's kind of what I'm doing as well, is it's like, wait a minute, this is not leading down the path that you want. How often do we see really high performers as well feel misunderstood frequently because their actions are perceived different than they intend? The lack of congruence, even in our intent and our actions, is often why we feel disconnected and misunderstood. And so for me, because I don't want anything from them, and I'm also not trying to cut them down, if I truly want for them, then my questions, my coaching, my conversation, my challenge of behavior is ultimately, hopefully bringing more clarity to them so they have permission to lean in to say something that maybe they haven't otherwise, or words to articulate or understand something that maybe they haven't otherwise. Does that make sense?
I'm listening. How can we enable the audience to take an ounce of this into their next conversation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to the whole bit here, but I think that so many people who don't want to tell their stories because they don't know their stories or they minimize the value of their stories are some of the prime examples of who can alleviate suffering for others. You know, the number of people I've heard, they're like, oh, I just had financial loss, or I had a really bad divorce, or man, my parents got broke up when I was 10. But like the reality of it is they minimize each and every one of those things. And in sharing their story and their experience, they're giving words to give permission and words to articulate and understand to others so they can act and do in their lives as well. Here's the really fun part though. Even if your goal isn't to help alleviate it for other people, just by communicating your own truths through the lens of lessons, you actually alleviate the pressure in you. By vocalizing, I told you it's the things that are left unsaid. Sometimes vocalizing your struggle, your approach in a conversation shows and demonstrates vulnerability, shows and demonstrates authenticity, and it allows someone else to see that you're a human being, not just a guru or a sage from a stage, but somebody who's been through life, who's gotten hit, who's been knocked down, who gets to stand back up just like every one of us. Right? So it's really about how are we normalizing the human experience so that regardless of how much money or how little money or what kind of cars we drive or where we live, that we can just talk to human beings and realize that we don't need to be protecting in the same ways that we need to. So how can someone apply this in their life? Go in and ask questions of inquiry, share a moment of struggle that was actually a victory for you. See and meet people where they are. And instead of having a reaction to them, why don't you pay attention to what you're reacting to within you and see if you can find some clarity in that? You know, we've got our 5 pillars for waste to wealth. I doubt we're going to have time to go through those today. But at the end of the day, I'm asking people to make the deepest investment in AI that they ever have. AI helps us get more information in a more global way, compress it, understand it, deploy it, refine it than we've ever been able to. I'm not talking about artificial intelligence, though. I'm talking about awareness and intention, right? If everybody invested in AI within themselves, within their relations, within their connections in life, if those are the only 2 steps you did, you'll be further along than you are today.
How can people apply to be under your tutelage?
In which sense? As potential clients for us to help?
Yeah. What group are they applying to, or what platform, or are you taking on?
There's a variety of ways to engage. What I would tell you is if you're on social media, I'm at Bogert Brian on any channel. And in fact, I'm going to do something, Jay, for you and your audience that I don't do on every show, but I'm actually going to give you guys a VIP code for free access to our next 3-day event. It is next week.
That's a big deal.
I don't know if does it even get produced quickly enough for the show to get out there?
Well, I mean, now I feel shame and guilt. So
no.
I'm just teasing. No. Hey, let me talk to Jenna. Let's see what we can do here. I don't want to
I mean,
promise.
if this thing could get busted out, we could
we
get
do for the
everybody
next
access to
one?
this next one. Otherwise, we can kick it to the October event, and I'd still
Let's
be
do
willing to give a
that
VIP
because I
access
don't
to our
want to
3-day
let
event.
you down. I don't want to
Okay.
just tease you. That would be bad, right? You know, based
All
on
right.
conversation.
So for the purposes of the
I'm
listeners,
honored.
then we will be hosting a 3-day event in October as well. It's a virtual mastery summit where we go through all of the pillars of waste to wealth, and we actually influence and deploy a variety of strategy and tactics around digital marketing to allow people to connect and convert at a higher level. Okay, go to go.brianbogert.com/amplify, and the VIP code is VIP 100. Okay, so any listener of this audience that would like to come for 3 days to learn with over 18 hours of coaching, a lot of the core principles that I've used as an entrepreneur for the last 20 years and things that are being deployed in our world today, as well as the worlds of our clients today, you'll get access to a basically how-to guide over the course of 3 days in October.